And then Dima, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just need to introduce our wonderful speaker, guest speaker today. Shawn, thank you so much for coming. And let me just introduce you. Dr. Shawn Loewen is professor in the Second Language Studies and MA-TESOL programs at Michigan State University. So he has a phenomenal record of publications in leading second language acquisition journals. He has also authored several books, including Introduction to Instructed Second Language Acquisition. He's the associate editor of the Modern Language Journal, and he's a mentor for all of us in the Second Language Studies program, and he's my advisor. So you can blame him for everything. I'm just kidding. He's just wonderful, and I just want to say that thank you so much, Shawn, for everything. I cannot describe how much I have learned from you over these years. Thank you so much. And without further ado, please welcome Dr. Shawn Loewen.
Great. Thank you, Dima, for that introduction. And yes, Dima and I have been working closely for, I guess, almost 4 years now. So, but I'm very happy to be here and to talk with you and share some of my experiences. And I really am looking forward to hearing about some of your perspectives on second language learning in the classroom. Let me see, share. All right. Let's see if I can figure this technology out.
Okay. We see your PowerPoint screen now, so that's
right.
Good.
Let me see if I can get the. Okay, can you see it? Is it in presenter view or whatever?
Yeah.
The correct view. Okay, great. So yes, I've titled my talk just basically Instructed Second Language Acquisition. One of the things that I've been concerned about is the link between research and practice. I've been a language learner for a long time, and it's really important to me what we do in the classroom and how we, even though I haven't been in the classroom for a while, I've done research there, and always like talking with teachers and hearing what's going on. So I'm going to follow the STARTALK format with the acquire, process, and apply. During the acquire part, I'm going to be presenting some information. One of the things, there will be time for discussion in the other two segments, but if you have clarification questions, if you just want to shoot them in the chat, that way I can address them right away if they're kind of short, just clarification questions. And then in the process and apply, we'll have a bit more time to discuss some of these concepts in more detail. So let's start. I love how they have the clapping hand as though they're they're anticipating already. And I got to pull the chat up here. Okay, yes. Let's put your questions in the chat. Okay. Okay, so what is instructed second language acquisition? What do I mean by that, and how does that differ from second language acquisition? Well, put simply, it's research into language teaching and learning in the classroom, and by that I mean generally, so not necessarily within the four walls, online, anytime when somebody's doing something special to try to learn a language. If you want to read more, I'm going to shamelessly plug my second edition to my Intro to ISLA book that came out last year. So have a look at that if you'd like. And one of the primary questions in instructed second language acquisition is L2 instruction effective? And I think the fact that we're all here means that we all believe that it is effective, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be wasting our time teaching and researching about teaching second language acquisition. So I think probably the question that we've been spending a lot of time looking at is what makes L2 instruction more or less effective? And so that's what I think a lot of instructed SLA researchers are looking at, is what's better to do in the classroom, what could be more beneficial, what might not work so well. And to answer that question, I think we have to ask ourselves another question: what do we mean by effective? Because we can't really measure effectiveness unless we know what our goal is. So why are students here? Well, I'd like to look at a couple of the stakeholders' perspectives, and I haven't tried this before, but I'd like you to make some chat contributions in response to these questions. So just shoot some answers in the chat. I'll give you a little bit of time to process, but we'll just kind of go through these. So what do you think your students want to achieve in your classes? What do you think your students want to achieve? Go ahead and put a couple things in the chat, and I have a few guesses as well. Feel like contributors to the conversation, get a good grade, a job, government jobs, okay. Speak in Russian with family members, okay, good grades. So yes, passing grade or a good grade is up there. Some students might have to pass a standardized test. I'm not sure if that's so common in Russian and Arabic, but certainly with ESL and passing TOEFL. I understand Russian pop songs, that's a good one. Knowledge of L2 grammar, does anybody want to learn grammar? Probably not so much your students, maybe. There's a few language nerds in there like us. Ability to communicate, yeah, maybe. Although one student in a Spanish class that I was researching in said, if I had known this class was going to be entirely in Spanish, I wouldn't have taken it. So I don't think she was really looking to communicate much in Spanish. So grammar doesn't come into their minds. That's we could talk for a while if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But so let's look at another group of stakeholders. And I put this in here, realizing that some of you are teaching in K through 12, and this isn't a constituency that I really look at. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this one, especially because in the research that I've done, mostly on university students, the parents don't really figure in. But what do parents want their students to achieve in the classroom? Jobs using Arabic, college scholarship, be fluent in the second language. Okay. Be well-rounded. So again, I put in here a passing grade, learn their heritage language. I think that's something that's important for parents, as we were just talking at the beginning with Tanya about her son and his not wanting to speak Russian. L2 grammar, maybe parents want to focus on grammar a little bit more. Round out their resumes, good. Ability to communicate and a better job prospects, okay. Read the Quran, okay. Yep, certainly for students learning Arabic, that's very important. So thinking about parents and their ideas, and then what do you want your students to achieve? A love of language, a love of the language, cultural appreciation, curiosity for the culture and language, cultural understanding. That's great. I like those. So what I've been focusing on primarily, I think, is ability to communicate and maybe ability to do academic work. Maybe that's influenced by my research in ESL. So those are two of the primary focuses, but I like what you guys have put in the chat as well. And then one other question is, what do academic programs want students to achieve? So the institutions that, if you will, that you're at, and maybe I won't make you think too much on that, because I did a bit of digging and I looked at some websites, and so Tanya McIntyre is at Kent State University, and they actually had a very nice description of program learning outcomes. And they draw on the ACTFL guidelines, which I thought was great. Excuse me a second. I have these allergies that cause me to cough a little bit. So perform tasks at an intermediate, high, and advanced low levels of proficiency. Conversations, so speaking is important. Read a wide variety of texts. Compose routine social correspondence, so some writing. And then these three all relate to kind of history, culture, cultural differences, diverse ethnic and cultural groups. So I thought that was really nice and comprehensive. So that was good. And then I also found this one, Hagar Ibrahim at Tarbiyah Academy. They have this posted. They also mentioned the ACTFL guidelines, which was great. And then it says, our school is committed to enabling students to achieve proficiency in modern standard Arabic. And the question of proficiency is, what does that mean? But they do a nice job here at the bottom of putting interpersonal communication, presentational speaking, my thing is covering it, writing, interpretive listening, and interpretive reading. So fairly comprehensive. So I would argue that a primary goal to achieve a lot of these things, these guidelines, these goals that people have put, is the ability to communicate spontaneously in the L2. So I think a lot of this communication that the programs are focused on, that some of you have been focused on in the chat, the ability to communicate spontaneously in the L2 is really important. And I think that, the ACTFL guidelines speak to that as well. So another question, how do we get learners to do that? And so this is where I want to draw a little bit on Instructed SLA research. And I'd like to talk about two types of linguistic knowledge. And these are explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge. And Liz is going to be ready here with a poll, because I'd like to know, how familiar are you with the concepts of explicit and implicit L2 knowledge? So Liz is going to put up a poll here. All right. So I'd like to get a sense of what you know about this. It's like election results coming in real time. Okay. Almost everyone has weighed in. And so good, I'm glad that there's some familiarity. Some people aren't familiar, and that's fine. I'm gonna explain them a little bit and then talk about, I'm assuming everybody can see that, the results, the poll results. Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Wait, I don't know. It says share results. People saw it, right? Okay. I'm going to go on. So I want to talk about these two types of linguistic knowledge because I think it's important for teachers to understand what it is that enables students to have communicative proficiency. So explicit knowledge is knowledge that we're aware of. It's something that we can say that we know. So I know this rule in English, for example. So it's declarative. Like I said, we can describe what we know. It's accessed through controlled processing. And basically what that means is it just takes a little bit of time cognitively to access that knowledge. It's not instantaneously. It's not accessed instantaneously. And it's often metalinguistic in nature. In other words, it using meta-language to describe that language. In contrast, implicit knowledge is knowledge that we're not aware of. We don't know that we know it. It's accessed automatically, so we don't have to think about it in order to access it. I don't have to think about the grammatical structures that I'm using to communicate unless I have a small pause to ponder. But we access things automatically for implicit knowledge. And it underlies communication. In that regard, it's similar to L1 knowledge that children develop before they start studying the language in school. They're able to use the language. They don't really think about it. They don't know that they know it. They just use it. So those are the two types of knowledge. And there's some theoretical differences, but I think most scholars, ISLA scholars, would acknowledge that these two types of knowledge exist, what the relationship is between them and what exactly they're called. Sometimes they're called declarative and procedural knowledge, but I like the terms explicit and implicit knowledge. And just to show some examples, example of explicit knowledge. The internet is full of charts of Russian grammar tables. So you can see there's some nice meta language there, declensions, case, nominative, accusative, genitive, a lot to learn. Russian also uses, you can use meta language. So here's some different metalinguistic terms that I found for Arabic grammar. So students would be able to say, yes, I know, what a masculine noun or adjective is in Arabic, if they have explicit knowledge of that. Implicit knowledge, on the other hand, an example of this from English, I don't have implicit knowledge of either Russian or Arabic, so I can't give examples of that. But one example, if you ask native speakers of English or L1 speakers of English, are these sentences grammatically correct? So John gave the painting to the museum. Correct, right? That's a grammatically acceptable sentence. John gave the museum the painting. Also grammatically acceptable. And we can then say John donated the painting to the museum. That also works. But if we say John donated the museum the painting, most L1 speakers would probably say that's not grammatical, that's not acceptable. And if you ask them why, if you ask the average Spartan on campus, they'd say, I don't know, it just sounds wrong. So that's implicit knowledge, right? L1 speakers are notorious, especially, I think, students who have studied in the American education system where grammar hasn't been a focus. They don't have much explicit knowledge, but they all have implicit knowledge about the language. So explicit knowledge is useful if learners have time to reflect. So it can be helpful for writing, for example, but learners need a little bit of time to think about, okay, what's the declension here that I should use for this, for this sentence in Russian. And because of that, it doesn't really contribute a lot to communicative competence because it's hard to draw on that knowledge to take the time to think about it when you actually need to communicate. Implicit knowledge, then, is one of the primary contributors to communicative competence, the ability to speak proficiently, fluently. And so I would argue that one of the primary goals that we're trying to develop in our learners is this implicit knowledge, this ability to use the language. And it was really gratifying to see that on the two programs where they listed their goals, none of them mentioned grammar, which I found very positive and encouraging because I think a lot of times, language learning is often conceptualized by the layperson as you learn grammar rules, you memorize vocabulary, and you learn grammar rules. So then another question, how do we get there? How do we get our learners to implicit knowledge? Well, this is going to be another topic, but what types of instruction lead to what types of knowledge? Opportunities for communication are key. I know Koen Van Gorp talked about task-based language instruction, so that's one of the areas. So we don't have time to go into all of this, but what I'd like to focus on a little bit more now is this idea of explicit and implicit knowledge. What's the next? So yes, so now we're up to the process. So that was a lot of content that I kind of threw at you there. So in order to help digest this a little bit, I'd like to take about, I think 10 minutes we'll have time for breakout rooms. And Liz is going to randomly assign you into breakout rooms. And I'd like you to answer or to talk about these three questions. So what makes sense to you about implicit and explicit knowledge? What questions do you have about these two types of knowledge? And those are sort of the basic ones. But if you feel comfortable with these two questions, you could go on to talk about what are the advantages and disadvantages of each type of knowledge. But I'd like to see and hear from you and have you have the chance to talk about what about these different concepts. So I think, oh yes, our lovely assistant Liz has already done that. My understanding is the only way to see these questions in the breakout rooms is to have it in the chat. So Liz has put them in the chat there. She's going to assign you to breakout rooms. I'll be going back and forth to different rooms, and I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. So that way we have a good amount of time to discuss that in the groups, and I'll kind of see if that's enough time or too much as we go along. So, okay, Liz, do your magic. So I want to just talk a little bit about, bring up one question that I heard in the last group, and then I want to hear from you guys a little bit. So one of the questions was, do we need to teach in a new way? Do we need to stop teaching explicit grammar, for example? And I think this is a question that you grapple with, especially in the US context where many English L1 speakers don't know grammar. You have to teach both English grammar and Russian or Arabic grammar. And there's something comforting about teaching grammar. It's, the nice thing about explicit knowledge is it's declarative. It's, that you know it. So, if a child goes home after school and they say, what did you learn? In Russian class today, they could say, oh, well, I learned these, conjugations. But if they just spend time talking about what they did over the weekend, they might just say, well, we just talked. We didn't really do anything. But they don't realize that they're actually practicing and developing their implicit knowledge and ability to use the language. So it's an interesting question. What other kind of main points or questions what questions did you still have? And I can't see people raising their hands, so maybe just go ahead and jump right in with audio.
I have a question about just what kind of knowledge do we have to consider? So in our group, we were mostly talking about grammar, like grammar being explicitly or implicitly taught. But we can, I guess, also talk about like vocabulary or pragmatic knowledge being both implicitly and explicitly like taught to students. Am I right about that? I mean, we just didn't have time to cover that.
Yeah. The explicit, so one thing to be careful of, so we're talking about explicit and implicit knowledge, and then there's also explicit and implicit instruction, which are often the same or often result in the same thing, but not always. So it's easier to teach grammar explicitly, but it doesn't have to be that way. But I think some researchers are thinking about, vocabulary in terms of implicit versus explicit knowledge, but a lot of that is form meaning mapping. So, if you know a word, right, you can say, well, yes, this word means X. Pragmatics as well. There's some implicit knowledge, but the main area where it's been talked about is with grammar. I think because, it has the longest history, I think, of research with, in linguistics. And it's an important, often people, when they think of learning a language, it's learning the grammar, right? So, other questions or comments? So this is where, as a teacher, you hear lots of interesting things said in the groups, and then you bring the class together and nobody really wants to say anything.
Well, actually, I have a comment, Shawn, and this is from learning a language myself. I mean, what stage do you say, okay, I really know it, and I feel I'm going to be in intermediate French for my whole life? But the point is when a word pops into your head, when you want to say something and a word pops into your head, which is implicit knowledge, when you move from explicit to implicit, maybe this is when you feel, okay, you're making headway. How you say, oh, did I make up that word? Let me check it in case and then you realize actually you've absorbed more than you've been aware of. And so is this something that people have talked about? Like, when do you know you really learned the language at this stage?
Well, I think that's a question for a whole nother hour's debate. I think looking at it situationally and looking at it, in terms of communicative competence, can a person communicate in a given situation, proficiently? I think that counts as, proficient. Does that mean that they can read, for English, like, Shakespeare or whatever? No, not necessarily. And I think as L1 speakers, we're all learning more about our language as it evolves, and we linguists, we study more. So I think, to me, I would be, celebrating learners' ability to use their language, even for just a little bit. Maybe they recognize, something on the internet that they're like, oh, wait, I understood that. So to me, that's, an incremental push towards proficiency. So I think we often get hung up on, it's like the question, that linguists get asked, how many languages do you know? Well, what do you mean by know, right? Do I have to speak it fluently? Do I just know a few words? But it's that practice and that communication, I think, that really builds up that, as you said, Mona, you obviously you realize you know more than you thought you knew. That's the development of implicit knowledge.
Well, I tell you, the way for French with me, for an entire year, I would sit watching the French news with subtitles every day for a year. And then one day, you just understood it without reading it. So how does that happen? Is that implicit or explicit?
That's implicit. That's implicit learning, implicit knowledge. Yeah, and that's what really helps with the ability to understand input as it comes in real time, and then also to be able to produce language in real time. I'm going to go on. I've got a few more discussion questions, I think. Just briefly, and maybe just put this in the chat, but do you feel like your institutions have clear goals for the Russian or Arabic learning? So I will say I looked on some of the websites for institutions where you work, and I didn't find clear goals. But do you feel like you know what the institutions want? Or is it kind of left up to the teacher, or maybe, students or parents? What do you feel in that regard? Like, do you feel like you have, like you're expected to teach grammar, for example? Are you expected to teach explicit knowledge? And I have lost my chat.
We're monitoring it while you go on, so if we see something, we'll let you know.
Oh, wait, there we go. Okay, so no responses to that yet. But, so it's something to think about. And I think my school expects our students to learn both, okay? Goals are mentioned on the syllabus, but not in the every program description. No, I don't feel like my high school has a set of clear goals. There's a sort of proficiency target for my school district, okay? In my institution, it's up to the teacher, okay? So to me, having a clear goal of where we want to go, because from my experience of learning a second language in the US, studying Spanish and French in the classroom, I wanted to learn how to communicate, and what I found was being taught was grammar rules. And seeing my kids study Spanish, however many, 25 years later, I see the same thing for them. And so I don't know how prevalent it is, but I get the sense that in the US, at least for foreign language instruction, teachers are often teaching grammar and then wondering why students aren't able to use the language. And so that's why, to me, this distinction between implicit and explicit knowledge is so important, because if you're only teaching grammar or primarily grammar, then students aren't really going to be able to communicate using the language because they haven't had the opportunity to develop implicit knowledge, which is what helps facilitate and underlie communication. Let me see here. How are we doing? Still got some time. So I want to talk about the reading that I had suggested. I just want to read this. Katie here says, the shift is happening away from grammar in the US, but it's a slow process. Our standards in MA just changed this year to reflect proficiency standards. Okay, that's great. And that's why I was so happy to see the ACTFL standards referenced in the two descriptors that I found. So this article, I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it or not, how recently, so I'll just recap it just briefly, but it's titled 4 Ways Can-Do Strategies, or can-do statements empower learner proficiency. And in this, Naditz and Lefer suggest that using can-do statements can facilitate L2 instruction and assessment. And they gave 4 main reasons for this. It provides class objectives, so students know going into the class, either on a daily basis or at a more general basis, they know what they're going to try to accomplish in that class. It can encourage learner self-reflection. So learners think, well, can I do this? Or do I, can I maybe do it a little, or can I not do this at all? It can clarify assessment, because if learners are expected to be able to do something with the language, then you can actually see if they can do that with the language. And then there's a link to the real world, because these can-do statements are based on things that we do in the real world. So hopefully it makes the language seem less like an academic subject and more like something that could actually be useful in the real world. So my next poll is, do you use can-do statements in your teaching? Or do you use can-do statements in your teaching? So if the lovely Lizz Huntley will post the poll. So again, I have no idea what people can see or can't see, but it looks like about 50% say that you use can-do statements in your teaching, and then another 21% sometimes. So I think that's great, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. So the next question is, how do you employ them, or how could you employ them? So yeah, I'd love to hear from some of you who use them, how you use them. So again, I think the easiest way is if you just, okay, Angelina raised your hand, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so about the first poll, so I guess there is a difference between using can-do statements at the beginning of our class, for example, and just telling our students like about the plan of what we will do, or, I mean, am I right, like that these things are different? So, and the question was about like using explicitly can-do statements rather than just talking about what we want to achieve during the class.
I think that the can-do statements are focusing very specifically on proficiency goals. So, I mean, in many ways, I think it's the same as telling students, okay, today we're going to do this, but the emphasis is not on the this being, today we're going to look at, Russian verb conjugations. Rather, the focus is on communication. Does that make sense? So I think they're similar, but this is just very much proficiency focused. Oh, there's a tricky one in the chat. Is there a conflict between can-do statements and the Bloom taxonomy? I'm not sure I'm gonna touch that one. I want to hear a bit more about how people use these can-do statements. Did somebody else raise their hand?
Yeah, so for me, I always use a can-do statement as part of my opening for class, and then I'll have students, and it's always something that is proficiency based, and then I'll have students come back to it in the middle and at the end and think for themselves, and once in a while I have them submit something saying like, oh, do you think you can do what we said we were going to be able to do at the end of class today? But I'm realizing that I have not taken the opportunity to turn that into like a collection of those statements. I have one every day, but then do they just disappear? And they're often similar from day to day, but it's not something that I keep track of and give to students at the end of the course or the beginning of the course and say, here's what it's going to look like on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So yeah, for me, it's something that's daily, but it isn't also part of my syllabus or my district outlines or anything like that.
Can you give me an example of a specific example of a can-do statement that you've used?
I can understand some details from a discussion about my classmates' favorite activities in Arabic.
Okay, great. So it looks like somebody else maybe raised their hand, and then I also have a sign that says, please move this window away from something. So if somebody else had raised their hand, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to add that as a Renee, I also use I open the class with can do statement and say what they will be able to do by the end of the class, and I put can do statements in my syllabus before, so like general can do statements of the course, and at the end of each unit, like chapter, after maybe 5 lessons, I offer them a reflection minute when they have to formulate their can-do statements at the end of each unit, what they can do in Russian after 5 lessons when we finish the topic.
And do you feel like they're able to reflect and think about, I like that, because implicit knowledge, you don't really know that you're gaining it. So if you do that can-do statement reflection at the end of like 5 lessons, do they feel like they've learned something then? Is it kind of a awareness raising for them?
Well, yeah, sometimes it's even like, it's funny because we can compare what I announced at the beginning of the chapter and what they got at the end. So sometimes it's like word by word, like it's similar, but sometimes it's different. And they realize that like apart from most of all, in most cases, they write about grammar also. Like I learned how to use participles in Russian. Well, yes, they can do it, but sometimes they go beyond it and they write about, like I learned a lot about that aspect of Russian culture, or I found out that like and something that is like revealing for me that I even didn't have it as a goal, but they did it on their own.
I think that's great. Anyone else? I think we have time for maybe one more example.
I have something to add. I don't use them very often, but I use them for self-assessment, and that's the way of figuring out who is struggling. And then I can work with the student, or maybe with like, it depends, right? I never got like majority of the students being confused, but there are always some students who are confused. And so I just either do additional lesson to practice or work with the student particularly. So that's my way of using that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So I realize my next question might not be the type to elicit people to jump in, but I was curious as to what struck you about the Naditz and Lafir article. What else? And I guess one question I would have is, did any of you think this just didn't seem possible for you in your context? Or if there was something else that you thought about as you were reading this, I'd be interested in hearing that. But is there anybody who just thought this is way too far outside of the context that I'm in? No? Okay. Good. All right, so 2 of the quotes that I really liked from this, and I think they kind of sum up what we've been talking about, is one of these, it says, learners, just as much as educators, need to know what it is they are expected to be able to do at the end of each learning experience. And so I really like that because it goes from, I think, I don't know if each activity, but each lesson, to even what we've just been talking about, like what's the goal of language learning? What goals do they have? I think if we know what the goals are, we're more likely to be able to hit them. And especially with communication and proficiency, where it's not so clear, again, implicit knowledge isn't something that people are necessarily aware of, then that can be helpful to have those goals and then to reflect on whether you've met them or not. And then I also thought this was a really nice, towards the end of their article, it says, ultimately, the goal of world language teachers is to create and inspire lifelong learners who can communicate and use the target language in culturally appropriate ways. And again, I thought that summed up nicely what I see as a primary goal of L2 instruction, but isn't always, I don't think, viewed that way by everyone. And often I think that wanting to learn grammar rules or to memorize word lists without context can be what people expect maybe in the classroom. And so moving away from that, I think is good. And maybe part of that is to educate, our students and maybe their parents that, these goals of communication aren't going to be met by looking at conjugation tables. I'm not sure. So I guess we've got about 5 minutes here, a little more. So how do you help learners achieve these goals in terms of, if we have these larger goals of proficiency and related to implicit and explicit knowledge, does this seem like something that can be helpful for you? Are these methods effective? I guess maybe in just kind of wrapping up, are there any other questions that you have specifically about what we've been talking about, or any examples that you'd like to share as well? So here's your chance to have a little bit of last discussion.
So can you answer the question that I had when we had a discussion in breakout rooms? Like, do we still need to teach grammar and vocabulary the same way as we used to? Or we need to move away from that? And if moving away, then how can we still teach effectively without doing that?
So personally, and also I think based on what research shows, is that we do need to move towards more communication in the classroom if learners want to be able to communicate. And so things like task-based language teaching are important. But I would also argue, so I'm not sure if you're aware of the comprehensible input movement, which also seems to be gaining a lot of ground, which goes back to Krashen, and they want to get rid of any attention to grammar. And I think that there needs to be a balance because grammar, explicit instruction, explicit knowledge can be helpful, especially for adult learners or for older learners who somebody was saying, that it helps learners learn the L2 more efficiently if they knew something about L1 grammar. And so they can be helpful. But I guess for me in the US, what I really push for is, because I feel like the instruction has been so focused on metalinguistic instruction, explicit knowledge, that I really push for, we need to get, communication proficiency standards in the classroom, because that's what's going to help learners. And so, I don't always know that I have my finger on the pulse of what's happening in K through 12 or other foreign language education in the university. And I'm sure it varies depending on programs and in different places. But I think from my perspective, the emphasis has been very strongly still on grammar. And so I think pushing for communicative activities, giving learners the opportunity to use the language is really, in communicative ways, is really important. So is that different, do you think, from what you've been doing or what's been done in your context?
I think I'm doing exactly what you just said, like keeping the balance, because I had a training on comprehensible input for 1 year with different instructors, and I found that I'm not comfortable staying 90% on the language and just skipping grammar and vocabulary, but it's not my main focus, of course, in the classroom, but I'm doing a balance. Sorry about that.
Right. Yeah, I guess I would say my goal with a talk like this isn't so much to come in and say, this is what you should be doing. My goal, I think, is to raise awareness of how we look at these issues from a more theoretical level. And then if you, understand these, or are able to reflect more on these concepts, then you can think about your own context and think what's most useful in my context, what's helpful here, how can I get my students to achieve the goals that they need to achieve. One other thing I will say that I heard in one of the breakout rooms is somebody mentioned that the distinction between acquired knowledge and learned knowledge, acquisition and learning, going back to Krashen and comprehensible input. And that is another, I feel, fairly similar description to explicit and implicit knowledge. Some teachers, some students are, I'm thinking more like MA students, are familiar with that way of talking about it, and I don't have a problem with that. But for me, I don't make a distinction between, acquisition is only the acquisition of implicit knowledge and learning is the acquisition of explicit knowledge. But that is another way that you may be familiar with this terminology. So, can you do both? Yes, and I think you should. And so my feeling is just that there's been so much emphasis on explicit knowledge and explicit instruction that trying to push it in the other direction, it may sound like that's all I believe in, but it's not. But I just feel like, encouraging teachers and having students understand that, in order to be able to use the language, you're going to need to practice using it in class. Maybe, like the girl who in the Spanish class who didn't really want to speak Spanish in class, wasn't probably looking to use it outside of class either. So any other final questions or comments? Because
I think that I try to keep the explicit knowledge to like the last 10 minutes of class, right? That I try to focus mostly on the communicative and like getting students talking and using language with my sort of can-do goals in mind. And then just at the end of class say, okay, so now did you use this skill today? Can you remember how you learned, can you see that you've made progress on this skill today? That for me has always been a really good balance between pushing students to communicate primarily, but also satisfying that need for a little bit of explicit explanation.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah. I think doing both is great. And some learners are going to end up like people like us who really like language and grammar is important to us and, are intrinsically interested. And some, may not. They're just hoping to be able to speak, to use the language on specific occasions. So. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you for an interesting talk.
You're welcome. And it's interesting hearing, I guess, I don't know, from the trenches is quite the right word, but from people who are out there doing what we, research about. And I think that's excellent. So I'm glad that you're able to have this opportunity, and that thank you, Paula and Dima and Liz, for inviting me to come and talk.
Wonderful. And what we will do is we saw some other questions in the chat and we are downloading the chat. So we will try to address your other questions at other times during the workshop. If not in the second hour, then next week in our Monday or Wednesday session. So thank you so much, Shawn, for coming and for giving your talk today. It was wonderful. So we'll give him a round of applause or a emoji as you'd like. And we're going to take a 5-minute break. So Liz or Dmitrii will put up the 5-minute break signal. So thank you, everyone. We'll come back in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you. Yep. All the best.
Okay. And I can start, actually. Let me see. Can you see my screen? Mm-hmm. So welcome to the second part of multimodal assessment. We're going to start with a couple of announcements. First of all, the wonderful Caitlin Cornell has kindly agreed to share her email address with you. So if you have any questions about accessibility and the assessment, just email her. She's super knowledgeable and just a wonderful person in general. So you can email her and she's fine with that. So And please don't forget also to check our Google Drive. One of you, I think, asked where I can find all the resources. So we have everything in one place. And so in our Drive, and I'll show you it in a second, you can find our guest lectures, all the slides, all the readings. You can find examples of group oral production task, all of multimodal assessments, instructions, and rubrics. And you can also see, and we did it intentionally, you can also see other portfolios, but please make sure not to change, your classmates' portfolios, but you can borrow with permission. I think it's an opportunity for professional development, and just want to make sure that you can see it. So here is the lecture. So this one is the reading that Shawn was talking about. You can just go back. So you have all the lecture readings here. You have CLAP resources. So this is where you can find some examples of tasks. For example, if you go to week 1, you can open this one and you'll find some examples of tasks with the instructions and everything, including lesson plans. So the idea is that you can work on your own during your free time. Just come here and pick up any ideas that you like for your own portfolios or for your teaching. So this is where you can find it. And any questions about this, about Google Drive?
And it's right that the Google Drive was a link sent to everyone via email. Is that correct?
So everyone can access it, yeah? Everything's good. And again, any questions, just interrupt me.
I have a question.
Sure.
So what we do in Google Drive, we just copy that document without copying and changing anything and upload to Catalyst, right?
Yes, you can download it from from Google Drive. Yeah.
So that exactly what it looks like.
Yep. Exactly.
With all you thank you.
So yeah, you can just go to your portfolios, just open, download it, upload it to Catalyst. That's all you need to do. Yeah.
Is it like where add discussion? This is where we upload it, right?
I'll get there in a second. I'll actually
because I had hard time to find.
No worries at all, because we will also have office hours this week. We'll be glad to help you with this. Catalyst, yeah, it's a new tool. But no question about Google Drive. Everything is good. You can access everything. Okay, that's awesome. So office hours. This is when you can. This is your Catalyst time. Can be. If you have questions about Catalyst, have questions about assessment or anything else, you just stop by our office hours on Fridays from 5 to 6 Eastern Standard Time. So it's the regular Zoom link and passcode. So, and we'll be happy to help you with anything. Yeah, sounds good. Okay. And let's just looking ahead. Okay. So our goal for this program. So in your assessment portfolio. At this point, you should already have your portfolio cover sheet done. So Liz has already given you some comments about it. And make sure to upload it to Catalyst under the planning tell criteria. So when you go to our group in Catalyst, find this PL2 planning, and you can upload your cover sheet here, add evidence. And again, so Liz has a wonderful PowerPoint presentation about this, but if you still have questions, stop by our office hours on Friday and we'll be glad to help you, okay? So this one, done, good. And so the next one is group oral production task and rubric, and Liz and I will give you feedback about it, so make sure to keep working on it. And I know some of you have already finished their group oral production task and rubrics, but you still have time. So this part we will require in this one as well. But in terms of multimodal assessment rubric, we had discussions about this. So we know many of you are working very hard. You're teaching. I know Tanya, for example, is teaching, is the lead instructor in the CSUN program. At CSUN in the STARTALK program as well. So I know you're busy. So we decided to make multimodal assessment and rubric, even though it's super cool, we decided to make it optional, but we will be working on it today. You will be working with Liz and Paula, and you can also submit it as a group or individually if you want. If you want to have your own, or you can work in your groups. Remember, Liz divided you into Jamboards, into groups, so you can do this kind of stuff. And we would love to give you feedback, and we would love to see your rubrics and multimodal assessments. Just want to make sure it's clear, but it is optional. Okay, sounds good. And self-assessment, the topic for next week. So this is the last part of your portfolio. And it's going to be easy. So it's not gonna, we don't expect it will take too much time. Okay, so this is what we expect from you to do. Yeah, any questions here? We're good? Everything's good? Awesome. That's great. That's great to hear. And just looking ahead again. So next week we will talk about self-assessment, a very interesting topic. And after that, so week 4 is the last week of the summer workshop. You will do. Not us, you will demonstrate one of your assessment instruments. So you will demonstrate one assessment instrument. It could be a multimodal task, or it could be a group oral production task, maybe a self-assessment, but you will demonstrate with your peers. So your peers will be your students, okay, for this demonstration. And on Wednesday, you will have individual sessions with us and with also professors from Michigan State University, and will give you individual feedback based on your assessment instruments. So the more assessment instruments you upload, the more feedback you will get. So this is the plan. Does it sound good?
Yeah, and I wanted to jump in just to add that Wednesday, June 30th, the extras who will be joining us are Professor Jason Merrill from the Russian program at Michigan State University, and also Dr. Ayman Mohammed, and they are professors of Russian and Arabic. So if your materials are in Russian or Arabic, we will have Liz, Dmitrii, and Jason Merrill and Ayman Mohammed to be providing feedback in those sessions. So those sessions you'll be paired with teachers of the same language, and then so you will be able to prepare those in your Russian or Arabic and discuss them in Russian and Arabic, and the feedback will be available in Russian and Arabic, or you can code switch into English as you would like. Does that sound right, Dima?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Paula. Yeah, definitely. So we'll have a group of professors here. So try to give you as much feedback as possible so you can improve your instruments even more. Okay, so, and we're going to start with some Blitz questions here. Unless you have any questions, you can, again, just feel free to interrupt me if you want. So Blitz questions, and we were inspired by Arabic and Russian proverbs, and we noticed that we have more in common, right? And so the similar proverbs. Smart people learn with repetition, and repetition is the mother of learning. I say it every time to my students so they know it by heart. Повторение – мать учения. Okay, questions for you. So let's start with this one. So, and this wonderful ACTFL's thing, proficiency, will help you answer this question. So do you want to measure vertical or horizontal growth, or both? And what is the difference between the two?
Sorry, do you want answers in the chat, or?
No, you can just answer. You can just answer. Yeah.
I feel like it really varies at what level your students are, for me. So I feel like both are really important, but there's faster vertical growth early on, and then there's drilling down for a very long time.
Yeah.
Horizontal growth.
That's a great, just like in this picture here, right? So students move to, so beginner low, they move to intermediate rather quickly, right? But then they start at intermediate low, and let's say at Middlebury, we'll have Jason here from Middlebury, and he'll say that, well, they kind of stuck sometimes at the intermediate level, right? So it's, so here, this is when horizontal growth would be better. Any other ideas?
I have a question actually about that, because when I was trying to figure out my students' level and using the ACTFL categories for that, I was confused because like how to measure, I understand how to measure vertically, but how to measure horizontally, I think I need a little bit more clarification on that, because what I figured out that my students can do tasks from the low level and high level, but like, is that all can be filled for the low level for them to go to mid level and then to high level and then to jump to like totally next level. For example, moving from novice level to intermediate and from intermediate to advanced.
That's a great question. So and Liz and Paula also, if you want to add to this. Here, I remember when I came here to the United States, so I could talk about literature, for example, The Great Gatsby, but I couldn't do something like beginner learners can do. And again, it depends on your students. Maybe you have certain tasks that you want them to do here, but you want more can-dos here at the intermediate level. And again, it depends on your students. Maybe here you want them to talk about literature, I don't know, in detail, I don't know, something that more advanced students can do. You want your intermediate learners do it. It's up to you. I think it depends on your students. But just my personal suggestion is to have as many can-do statements here as possible, because this is the horizontal growth. And because like if you measure it vertically, the students, they see, okay, I'm intermediate again, but here horizontally, they can do more things. So if you have more can-do statements at the intermediate level, what exactly you want your intermediate students to do, you can show it to them and you see, so you're growing, right? And Paula,
I'll chime in too, because I think, Svetlana, you've touched a area that needs a lot of exploration in both in theory and in relation to the ACTFL guidelines. So we, as a field, don't have a good way to measure or monitor horizontal growth, although it's something that we do need to focus on, because our reward systems and our ways of measuring language are usually on a vertical scale. And there's an assumption with this ACTFL pyramid that if students can do tasks in the green intermediate level, then they can do everything at the blue novice level, right? The theory of the pyramid that ACTFL articulates is that proficiency builds, and if you have evidence of advanced, let's say red level skills, then obviously you can do all the green and blue. But it's not true. We see it time and time again. And if we think of language as built on practice, if students practice even some really advanced level speaking tasks, they'll become good at them. So we see this a lot in the diplomatic corps, where we focus on very high level language, but then they're missing some of the vocabulary areas of low level tasks. Or you might have students who can do some intermediate tasks, and if they're lucky and get assessed on those specific tasks in a test, the test may say, hey, we have evidence that they're at the green intermediate level. They're intermediate, but wait a second, actually that student is still at the novice level. They can do a few green level intermediate tasks. So I think that it is a huge area, and I think there's not a lot of development, but one of the examples I talked about with Dima and Liz earlier today was like a summer camp approach. It's summer, and at camps, we talked about, playing tennis is kind of like a skill that you acquire, much like language. But a lot of times at a camp, kids will go for a week or a month, and they'll get badges for all the different sports that they pick up: tennis, badminton, racquetball, t-ball, volleyball, and they fill out a chart or put them on a jacket, or they put them on a banner for each sport that they have mastered. And if we think of that as a way of measuring also language skills that are associated with various can-do statements, you could tell students in a beginning Arabic class or a beginning Russian class, at the end of the first semester, you'll be able to do at least 10 different speaking tasks in different areas, because those are the things we're going to practice. And at the beginning they'll have nothing on their banner, but by the end, they can have all of these different badges to represent the different can-dos that they've shown evidence of mastering. And that's where you get at the depth and the horizontal growth in vocabulary and speaking ability levels.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question. And Paul and Liz, if you want to interrupt me, if you want to start your sections a little bit early, just let me know. I think I'm going to skip this one and this one, but it's kind of this question. So should speaking as a construct be expanded? This one is from Monday's class. Anybody?
One thing I think about with speaking is the way that I learned informal Arabic dialects, which was over like Facebook Messenger. And so when I was studying abroad, I would hear Jordanian dialect all over, but it was too quick, like too intense for me to acquire it. It wasn't comprehensible input. And so I was studying formal Arabic in school, but the way that I learned to speak Jordanian dialect was typing. And so even back then I didn't even have an Arabic keyboard. And so I was just writing it with English letters, and I would just chat back and forth with friends in a way where I could say, oh, what's that one word? And that language significantly mimics what real spoken Arabic would sound like. And so I learned a huge amount of vocabulary and grammar to speak in a way, and I learned it without speaking, but it was obviously interpersonal communication. So I think interpersonal communication already includes that. It's not like that is outside of the definition, but yeah, I was able to learn speaking without necessarily speaking.
Yeah, that's a great example. And people, I've noticed that people more and more, they prefer not to talk on the phone, for example. I don't know, it's kind of related to your example, but they prefer to chat. Yeah, just type. Don't call me. I'll just type it. Yeah, so it's kind of like related. Is it also speaking? Yeah, that's a great point. And this one, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add that Kirk Belknap at BYU has done some interesting research on how that texting language has actually changed the spoken language in Arabic, and that those lines, those social media spoken language lines are much blurrier, become more blurry over time even.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. My last question here. So what are some modes that help us communicate meaning? So like typing, like in the chat, right? So what else? Like audio, right? Audio. I can speak, you can hear me. Maybe something else?
Visual.
Mm-hmm.
Gestures, lips, gestures, pictures, everything.
Exactly. So these are some modes. And my last point here will be about multimodal assessment accessibility. And last time we talked about this from language learners with learning disabilities by Anne Duvall. So she said that using multiple modalities during language instruction, every student can access the information. So multimodal, multiple modes are good for learners with disabilities. That's the idea. But when I talked to you, some of you during the breakout sessions last time, you actually said that multimodals doesn't work for many students with disabilities. So it's kind of like contradictory, and I wanted to address this. So does multimodality always equal accessibility? And what are some strategies that can make multimodal assessments more accessible? What do you think? Natalia? Yeah.
I think it's considering that students with disabilities or sensitivities, trauma, are not really or not comfortable with some modes of assessments. You can give them a choice. And you suggest multimodal, you suggest tasks for example, if one student is very shy and for some reason refuses to speak, he or she can write. Some students, they're afraid to speak before the audience. They can record it and provide audio. Some students are not comfortable recording the audio. They feel stupid. This, I forgot, not Padlet, something that you can record yourself and send it. And some students are very comfortable with this. So, you know, some students are they don't want to write, they want to speak. You can customize assessments. You can customize assessments and you can customize tasks. And actually, it's very interesting activity because you try to match and you see how students are feeling more comfortable and more, you know, more willing to learn because they don't see assessment as a punishment or struggle. They just do it. And sometimes I don't even call it assessment. Actually, it's the best way. Don't call it assessment, and you get really you get better results.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you.
That was my idea.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing this. And I think I'm ran out of time with my part, so I'm just gonna stop here. And thank you so much for your contributions. Yeah.
Okay, then Liz, I will show the slides from my screen for the next few ones. Is that right? So let me go to share the screen. And it's the same PowerPoint. It's just who's driving the car. All right, so we thought we would do a little recap. And if you remember this slide from last time, so this is a general kind of brainstorming idea to get you to see how we are hoping that through this workshop, you'll get ideas on how to do 3 different types of assessments: the group orals for spontaneous speech, and now thinking about Shawn Loewen's presentation, the spontaneous speech is practicing implicit knowledge, right? And getting to be able to spontaneously speak. Multimodal presentations, the preparation for that is using explicit knowledge, looking words up, looking for information and preparing things that are not yet quite in your implicit and automatic memory banks, but using language that you are trying to acquire, right? And so that's another reason why we have group orals and multimodal presentational speaking tasks, is because they both contribute to building information in the brain through practice, and it is also working on your implicit and your explicit knowledge areas as you build spiraling upward towards a more implicit representation of language in the mind. So something that we have been talking about is mapping your instructional units and your assessments to can-do statements. So if you remember before, we showed Mariah Converse's list of can-do statements, and we showed you that we thought this first one, I can list my classes, worked really well by mapping it onto presentational speaking, something that students would prepare ahead of time, rehearse, practice, and then present. Have the presentation be part of team building and getting to know each other, creating a motivationally nice environment. And then Can Do 7, I can contribute to a conversation about a story. We showed the task of you see people in the restaurant, and it was more spontaneous for a group oral. So another thing that you see is we've got this list of can-do statements that Mariah Converse very nicely put together. Next week, we're going to be talking about getting that list of can-do statements to students ahead of time. So Shawn Loewen talked about the article in the binder today. And if you remember looking on that, on page, if you have your binder, on page 48 of that article, it has a checkbox for can-do statements. And it's, I can do this on my own, I can do this with help, or I can't do this yet. So that's something that we're going to build on next week with the self-assessments. We would want to have your list of can-do statements for the semester, like they're listed here by Mariah Converse. And then we would have checklists where students would be marking how well they can do these things. So this is in your binder in Shawn Loewen's article. Sorry, my Zoom background keeps erasing it. But on page 48 of that article, it's from the Swiss can-do statements that this is taken, where students can tick off how well they can do that task on a Likert scale. From this one is 1 to 3, or you could even have a further differentiation, like 5 different categories or levels of how well they can do things. That's up to you. And if you can start imagining giving students the list of, let's say, 10 can-do statements at the beginning of the semester, probably some of your students will have more ability than others in being able to do these things. And that could be based on the heritageness of the students. We're going to have Megan Driver come next week to talk about heritage language learners. But with these can-do statements and paired up with these types of questionnaires on how well you think you can do this task, you'll be able to get growth if you give the self-assessment at the beginning of the semester and at the end. And if in between, the can-do statements themselves are tied to the tasks that you're actually doing in the classroom. And we think it's really important for Russian and Arabic